My parents told me I should have been the one in the casket, claiming I was easily replaceable compared to my brother. I stayed silent for decades, letting them believe their lie about his accident remained buried. Now, sitting here with cold coffee at 7:58 in the morning, my finger hovers over the enter key. When this email hits the federal server, the quiet life they built on his bones will finally collapse. My name is Mara Vance. I am 32 years old, and my entire professional life is built on the assessment of catastrophe. As a senior risk analyst for a private firm that models economic collapse, I spend my days staring at spreadsheets, calculating the precise moment a system will break under pressure. I live a disciplined life. My apartment is minimalist, my clothes are monochromatic, and I speak only when necessary. I am the woman you pass in the hallway and forget 5 seconds later. That invisibility has always been my greatest asset. But this morning, I'm about to trade it for a target on my back. The ceramic mug on my desk held coffee that had gone stone cold. Beside it, my phone lay face down on the polished oak table, a deliberate choice to silence the inevitable notifications. It was 7:58 in the morning. Outside my window, the city was waking up, oblivious to the fact that I was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of my family's carefully constructed existence. I looked at the laptop screen. The cursor blinked rhythmically at the end of a scheduled send command. The email was drafted, the attachments were uploaded, and the recipient field was populated with the direct intake address for the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White-Collar Crimes Division. My mother's voice echoed in my head, a memory so vivid it made my stomach turn. It was not a scream. It was a whisper, delivered in the dark hallway of our old house 3 weeks after the funeral. You should have been the one in that car. Mara, God, why wasn't it you? You're so replaceable. For 12 years, I let that sentence carve out the hollow space inside my chest. I let them tell the world that my brother, Julian, died in a tragic accident. A simple case of a young man losing control on an icy road. They built a shrine to him. They accepted the sympathy of the community. They cashed the insurance checks. But the file currently sitting in my outbox proved that Julian did not lose control. He was driven off the road by panic, fleeing a meeting my father had arranged, carrying a debt my mother had signed his name to. My finger hovered over the trackpad. The cursor wavered over the cancel button. In our house, silence was not just a habit. It was a survival mechanism. My parents operated like a sovereign state where information was currency and affection was a transaction. Growing up, I learned that asking questions was an act of rebellion. To survive, you simply existed, you nodded, you smiled for the photos, you ignored the discrepancies. I remembered the last time I tried to ask my father about the inconsistencies in the old bank statements. He had looked at me with eyes devoid of warmth. Mara, don't you dare dig up the past. We did what was necessary to keep this family afloat. Do you hear me? If you love us, if you have any loyalty, you will stop. I looked around my quiet apartment. It was perfectly orderly. The books were aligned by height. The coasters were centered. It was the sanctuary of a woman who desperately needed to control her environment because she had no control over her history. But the order was a lie. The peace was a lie. The digital clock on my screen flipped. 7:59. I had 60 seconds before the automated system would release the email. 60 seconds to decide if I was willing to become the villain in their story to finally be the hero in mine. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that defied my calm exterior. If I did nothing, the email would send itself. I just had to sit on my hands. I just had to not stop it. The world outside looked peaceful. The sun was cutting through the clouds. But inside the network cables running under the floorboards, a storm was gathering speed. I watched the seconds tick down. 58, 59. I did not move my hand. I let the clock strike 8. Julian was the sun, and I was just the cold earth waiting for his warmth to hit me. From the time we were small, The hierarchy was clear. If Julian got an A-, it was a tragedy that required a tutor and a family meeting. If I got straight A's, it was simply expected maintenance, like changing the oil in a car. I grew up knowing that my role was to be low maintenance. I was the spare tire, kept in the dark trunk, only to be thought of if the main vehicle failed. But when the main vehicle crashed and burned on Route 95, they did not want the spare, they wanted the wreck back. The weeks following the funeral were a blur of black casseroles and whispered condolences. I was 20 years old then, home from college, trying to be useful. I was washing dishes in the kitchen, scrubbing a stain off one of Julian's favorite mugs. My hand slipped. The ceramic shattered against the porcelain sink. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent house. My mother rushed in. She did not ask if I was okay. She stared at the shards of the mug, her face twisting into a mask of pure, distilled hatred. She gripped the counter, her knuckles turning white. "That was his," she whispered. Then her voice rose, cracking under the weight of her grief and gin. You clumsy little idiot! You ruin everything! I'm sorry. Mom, stop. Just stop talking." She lunged forward, grabbing my shoulders, shaking me hard enough to snap my head back. "Why are you here?" Why is it you walking around this kitchen? It's wrong. It's all wrong. You should have died instead of your brother. He had a destiny. You just have space." I stood frozen as she collapsed into sobs, but the words did not dissolve with her tears. They hardened inside me like concrete. That was the day I learned that my existence was an administrative error in their eyes. To cope, they began to edit the past. Julian was no longer the boy who got suspended for fighting or the teenager who stole cash from Dad's wallet. He was canonized. They scrubbed the timeline. Every story told at dinner parties was polished until it gleamed. Julian was a saint who died due to icy roads and bad luck. I sat at those dinners, nodding, eating my food, forcing myself to swallow the lies along with the roast chicken. But the dead leave echoes. 6 months after the accident, I was cleaning out the garage, a task my father refused to do because it was too painful. I found a box of Julian's things that hadn't made it to the shrine in the living room. Under a stack of old comic books, there was a burner phone. It was cheap, plastic, and dead. I plugged it in, using an old cable I found in a drawer. When it powered up, there was one voicemail from the morning he died. I pressed play. The voice was not Julian's. It was a man, low and rough. "Pick up, kid. You can't run from this. The interest is compounding every hour. If you don't pay by noon, well, your daddy can't protect you from everything." My heart hammered against my ribs. Julian didn't have debts. Julian had a trust fund. I took the phone to my father that night. I thought he would want to know. I thought he would call the police. I found him in the study. I played the message. He did not look surprised. He looked terrifyingly calm. He reached out, took the phone from my hand, and dropped it into his glass of scotch. "Dad, what are you doing, that man?" He threatened Julian. My father looked at me, his eyes cold and dead. There was no man. Mara. Julian was stressed about exams. "That is a prank call. You are imagining things because you want drama." But the voice, enough. He slammed his hand on the desk. "Do not tarnish your brother's memory with your paranoia. You are dismissed." I walked out of the study, leaving the phone drowning in the amber liquid. I realized then that the silence in our house was not peace. It was a fortress built to keep the truth out, and I was the only one trying to open the gate. So, I learned to lock it. I learned to stop asking. But I never forgot the sound of that man's voice, and I never forgot the look in my father's eyes. It was not confusion. It was recognition. I moved 1,200 miles away to a city where the wind cut as sharp as a knife. Chicago suited me. It was cold, functional, and indifferent. I rented a studio apartment on the 24th floor of a steel high-rise, a place so sterile it looked like a hotel room. I owned exactly 4 plates, 4 bowls, and 1 mug. There were no ghosts here. There were no shrines to dead brothers in the living room. I built a life that was the exact inverse of the one I left behind. My career choice was no accident. I became a forensic data analyst. While my parents dealt in emotions and revised histories, I dealt in binary code and audit trails. In my world, numbers did not have feelings. They did not lie to protect a reputation. 2 plus 2 always equaled 4, no matter how much you cried about it. I found a profound sense of safety in that absolute truth. I spent my days sifting through corporate wreckage, finding the exact moment where negligence became fraud. My family only called when they required maintenance. They treated me like a distant IT support service or a tax consultant who worked for free. I was the practical daughter, the one who handled the logistics while they handled the drama. My mother called me on the anniversary of the accident. It was always the same call at exactly 9 in the morning. "Mara, are you? Are you there?" "I'm here." "Mom." I was just looking at his picture, the one from the lake house. He looks so alive in it. It feels like he could just walk in the door. She was reciting lines. I could hear the cadence of rehearsal in her voice. It was the same monologue she delivered to her bridge club and the neighbors. Julian was the tragic prince, froze in time, perfect and blameless. "He was driving too fast because he was excited to get home," she continued, her voice trembling on cue. "He loved us so much. He just wanted to be with us." "I know." "Mom." I hung up feeling nothing but a dull ache behind my eyes. I returned to my work. I was currently contracted to audit a mid-sized regional bank that was being acquired by a larger conglomerate. It was tedious work, merging databases and flagging inconsistencies. I was scrolling through thousands of archived loan applications, looking for pattern deviations in the approval process. That was when I saw it. It was purely accidental. My search parameters were set to flag any internal accounts linked to employees or high-risk profiles. The algorithm pinged a file because of a metadata mismatch. I opened it, expecting a clerical error. It was a secured loan file from 12 years ago. The name on the file was Julian Vance. My breath hitched. I stared at the screen, my hand freezing on the mouse. It was a standard personal loan application, marked as closed and written off due to death of the debtor. That was standard. But my eyes drifted to the digital timestamps at the bottom of the record. In a secure banking system, every file has a creation date and a last modified date. Usually when a file is closed, it is locked. The last modification should have been the date they processed his death certificate. But the timestamp read October 4th, 2014. I did the math in my head. Julian died in 2009. The file had been accessed and modified 5 years after his funeral. I leaned closer to the monitor. This was not a system glitch. A glitch creates random corruptions. This was a specific entry. Someone had gone into a closed, archived file and changed something. The data integrity hash was broken, which meant the contents of the file no longer matched the original backup. Why would anyone edit the loan documents of a dead man 5 years after the fact? I told myself it was professional diligence. I was an auditor. It was my job to investigate anomalies. I was not doing this because I was the bitter sister. I was doing this because the data was wrong. I clicked on the version history tab. Most people think that when you delete or change a number in a database, the old one is gone. But in financial systems, nothing is ever truly gone. There is always a shadow layer. My heart began to beat a heavy, slow rhythm against my ribs. I was about to cross a line. Accessing this specific level of detail for a family member was a gray area, but the file was part of the batch I was legally authorized to audit. I whispered to the empty room, Just look at the logs. That is all." I expanded the history. The field that had been modified was the guarantor section. Someone had retroactively removed a name from the cosigner field 5 years after the loan defaulted. They had scrubbed a liability. The suspicion that had been dormant for a decade suddenly woke up. It was hungry. I realized I wasn't looking at a bank error. I was looking at a fingerprint. And for the first time in my life, I had the power to lift it. I pulled the accident report from the National Insurance Database. Accessing it was a breach of protocol, but I had already crossed that line when I opened the bank loan file. The screen filled with scanned PDFs of documents from 2009. They were grainy, low-resolution images of police forms and insurance assessments. To anyone else, they were just boring paperwork. To me, they were the blueprint of a lie. I started with the signatures. I magnified the release form my mother had signed, authorizing the insurance payout. Then I opened the liability waiver signed the same day. I placed the two windows side by side. I overlaid the signatures using image comparison software. They were a 100% match. Human beings never sign their name exactly the same way twice. There are always microscopic variations in pressure, angle, or the tail of a letter. A perfect match meant one thing. The signature had been lifted from one document and digitally pasted onto another. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This was forgery. I dug deeper into the metadata of the case file. I found the original field notes from the responding officer, a man named Officer D. Reynolds. In his handwritten scribble, barely legible on the scan, he had noted, witness statement taken from driver of blue sedan, license plate 348. I switched to the final digital report filed 2 weeks later. Under the section labeled witnesses, the field was empty. It simply read, none. Solo vehicle collision. Someone had erased the witness. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight. I needed to know who had the authority to alter a police file and an insurance claim. I ran a query on the modification logs. These systems are old, often built on legacy code that tracks every login to prevent internal fraud. The cursor blinked. The list of access logs populated. Most were standard, insurance adjusters, clerks, but there was an entry from 4 years after the accident. Someone had logged into the external portal using a guest vendor account. The IP address traced back to a residential service provider in our hometown. I cross-referenced the username associated with the guest account. It was a generic string of numbers, but the recovery email linked to it was not generic. It was G. Vance, Architects, Stockmail.com, my father's business email. I stared at the screen. My father, Gerald Vance, had logged into the insurance database 4 years after his son died. He had not done it to mourn. He had done it to delete a witness and copy a signature. You didn't just let him die, I whispered to the empty room, my voice trembling. You covered it up. This was not just a family tragedy anymore. This was a criminal conspiracy. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. All those years I spent thinking I was the disappointment, the one who wasn't good enough, were a distraction. They needed me to feel small so I wouldn't look big enough to see the truth. They needed me to be the scapegoat so I wouldn't become the investigator. I did not pick up the phone. I did not call my mother to scream or demand answers. That was what the old Mara would have done. The old Mara would have begged for an explanation. The new Mara, the one sitting in a cold apartment with a hard drive full of evidence, knew that an explanation would just be another lie. I reached into my bag and pulled out an encrypted external hard drive. I plugged it into the USB port. Copying, I said softly. I am taking everything. I initiated a full download of the insurance file, the bank loan history, and the metadata logs. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 10%, 20%. Every byte of data was a nail in the coffin of my relationship with them. I watched the green bar move, feeling a strange sense of detachment. I was analyzing the risk of my own family, and the model was showing a catastrophic failure. The download finished. I ejected the drive and put it in my pocket. I had the gun. Now I just needed the bullets. I turned off my monitor, leaving the room in darkness, the only light coming from the blinking red LED on the smoke detector above me. It looked like a warning, or maybe a recording light. Either way, I was done acting. I was preparing for war. Predators have a keen sense for when their prey stops moving. My silence must have triggered an alarm in the house on Elm Street, because 2 days after I downloaded the files, my phone lit up. It was 7:30 in the evening. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. I knew that if I did not pick up, they would show up at my door. "Mara!" My mother's voice was dripping with that sugary, poisonous concern she perfected years ago. "Honey, we haven't heard from you. Is everything all right?" I held the phone away from my ear, staring at the hard drive sitting on my coffee table. "I am fine. Mom, just working late. It is audit season." "You sound distant," she said. The sweetness began to curdle. "You sound like you're hiding something. You know, Julian started acting secretive right before the end. It breaks my heart to hear that same tone in your voice." There it was. The dead brother card, played within the first 30 seconds. "I am not Julian," I said, keeping my voice flat. "No," she replied, her tone hardening instantly. "You're not. You are the one who survived. Don't forget that. Don't you dare forget that you owe this family for that privilege." I heard the rustle of the phone being passed. My father took over. He did not waste time with pleasantries. "I got a call, Mara, from our old agent at the firm. He said someone was poking around the closed archives. Someone with your credentials." My stomach dropped. I had underestimated their network. In a small town, the insurance agent plays golf with the architect. "It is my job, Dad," I said. "I audit files. It was random data sampling." "Random?" He laughed, a dry barking sound that made my skin crawl. "Nothing you do is random. You are looking for something. Let me give you a warning, Mara. Stop digging. You think you want answers, but you won't like what you find. You will only hurt yourself. Leave the past where it is buried." "I was just checking a discrepancy," I lied, forcing my voice to sound small and defeated. I needed to make them think I was folding. "It was nothing. I'm sorry if I worried you." I waited. I needed to play the role of the submissive daughter one last time to buy myself time. "Good," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "We just want to protect you. You know how fragile things are. You know we can't handle another scandal. You owe us your loyalty. Mara, after everything we went through, you owe us." "I know," I said. I won't look at the file again." "Good girl," he said. "By the way, tell your office to stop flagging the guarantor field on the loan documents. It triggers alerts on my end, too." The line went dead. I sat there, freezing cold in my warm apartment. My blood ran cold. He had slipped. I had never mentioned the bank loan to him. I had never mentioned the guarantor field. He said the insurance agent called him, but then he mentioned the bank records. He knew exactly what I had found because he was not just protecting a memory. He was actively monitoring the specific data points he had altered. He had alerts set up on the lies he told. I realized then that this was not a misunderstanding. I was standing on a bridge, and my father had just handed me a match and told me to burn it down myself, or he would throw me off. They knew I knew. And now, I was no longer their daughter. I was a loose end. I sat in the dark, the blue light of the monitor painting my face in ghostly hues. I had spent the last 3 hours decrypting a folder labeled corrupted data that I had pulled from the backup. It was not corrupt. It was hidden. Inside, there was a single audio file recorded on a digital dictaphone the night Julian died. The timestamp read 8:45 in the evening. He crashed his car at 10:30. My hand trembled as I clicked play. I put on my noise-canceling headphones, sealing myself in with the ghosts. Static hissed, followed by the sound of a chair scraping against a hardwood floor. Then, I heard him. "Dad, please! I can't do this!" I looked at the ledger. It's not just a loan. It's fraud. Julian's voice was high, tight with a panic I had never heard before. He sounded like a child, not a 24-year-old man. My father's voice cut in, smooth and terrifyingly calm. It is Bridge Capital. Julian, it is a standard procedure to cover the liquidity gap. We need $500,000 by tomorrow morning to satisfy the investors. But it's in my name, Julian screamed. The audio peaked, distorting his voice. You're making me the guarantor for a shell company that doesn't exist. If the feds look at this, if they trace the assets, I go to prison. You won't go to prison if you keep your mouth shut and do as you are told. My mother's voice joined the fray. She sounded annoyed, as if he were refusing to eat his vegetables rather than refusing to commit a felony. We have done everything for you, paid for your school, bought you that car, and now, when we need one tiny signature, you hesitate? You are so weak. I'm not weak, I'm scared. This is stealing. Mom, it's wrong. What is wrong is watching everything we built crumble because our son lacks the stomach for business. My father said, here's the pen, sign the papers, get in the car, drive to the notary in the city, and get it stamped before the morning collection. If you don't leave now, well, don't bother coming back. There was a silence on the tape that lasted for 10 agonizing seconds. Then, I heard the sound of heavy breathing. I heard Julian hyperventilating. I can't breathe. I can't. Go! My father roared. A door slammed. Then the sound of footsteps running. Then the recording ended. I ripped the headphones off and threw them onto the desk. I scrambled to the bathroom and retched into the sink until there was nothing left in my stomach but bile. They didn't just cover up an accident. They caused it. They had sent a terrified boy out onto an icy road, blinded by tears and panic, carrying the weight of their financial crimes. He didn't lose control of the car. He was driving away from a life he couldn't survive. I washed my face with freezing cold water. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red, but my hands had stopped shaking. The grief was gone, burned away by a white-hot rage that felt like clarity. I walked back to my desk. I did not call my parents. I picked up my personal phone and dialed a number I had researched weeks ago, a federal whistleblower attorney based in Washington, D.C., who specialized in corporate fraud. It rang 3 times. Lawson and Associates, a voice answered. My name is Mara Vance, I said. My voice was steady. Harder than steel. I have evidence of wire fraud, insurance fraud, and coercion leading to wrongful death involving the architectural firm Vance and Partners. I have the bank records, the altered police reports, and I have the audio recording of the conspiracy. Ms. Vance. The lawyer's tone shifted instantly from professional to urgent. Are you safe right now? I am safe, I said, but I am done being silent. I am preparing to send the entire digital dossier to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Intake Division. Do not send it yet, the lawyer said. We need to structure the immunity deal. If you send that, you implicate yourself in the data breach. I don't care about the breach, I said. I just want to make sure they can't bury him again. I am sending it at 8 a.m. That gives you 12 hours to draft whatever you need to draft. Mara, listen to me. No. You listen. My brother died because he was afraid to say no. I am not afraid. I will send the files at 8 o'clock. Be ready. I hung up. I pulled up the email client. I attached the audio file. I attached the bank logs. I attached the comparison of the forged signatures. The subject line read, Evidence of felony fraud and obstruction of justice. Vance case. I looked at the clock. The night was long, but for the first time in 12 years, I wasn't waiting for the sun to rise. I was waiting to burn the house down. They summoned me home. It wasn't a request. It was a command disguised as a plea for unity. I drove the 3 hours to the sprawling estate that had been purchased with blood money, my trunk heavy with nothing but my laptop and a change of clothes. I wasn't staying. The living room was exactly as I remembered it, pristine, cold, and smelling of lemon polish and old secrets. My father stood by the fireplace, nursing a tumbler of scotch. My mother sat on the velvet sofa, twisting a handkerchief in her hands. They didn't look like monsters. They looked like tired, aging socialites. "We need to talk about this. This misunderstanding," my father started, his voice smooth, trying to regain the control he had lost over the phone. "We know you found the recording, Mara. It was a difficult night. Emotions were high." "It wasn't a difficult night," I said, standing near the door, refusing to sit. "It was extortion. You blackmailed your own son." "We were protecting the family name." He slammed his glass down on the mantelpiece. "Do you have any idea what would have happened if that business failed? We would have lost everything, the house, the firm, our standing in the community." Julian knew what was at stake. He was just being dramatic. "He was terrified," I countered, my voice shaking slightly despite my best efforts. I heard him gasping for air. "You sent him out to drive when he couldn't even breathe." My mother looked up, her eyes wet, but her jaw set in a hard line. "It was a mistake, Mara, but it was 12 years ago. The world is different now. Everyone makes compromises. We did what we had to do to survive. Society doesn't forgive failure. We couldn't let them see us fail. So you let him die instead? That is unfair." She stood up, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "It was an accident. The road was icy. If he hadn't been so panicked, he would have been fine. He was always too soft. We tried to toughen him up. We tried to make him a man." I looked from one to the other. There was no remorse. There was no grief for the boy who died alone in the dark. There was only fear of exposure, fear of losing their status. They weren't sorry he was dead. They were sorry I had found out why. "I'm going to the authorities," I said. The words hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room. My father took a step toward me. "You will do no such thing. Think about what you are doing. You are going to destroy your mother. You are going to destroy me. For what to vindicate a ghost, Julian is gone. Destroying us won't bring him back. We are your family. Mara, you owe us your silence." "I owe you nothing," I said. "I paid my debts the day you told me I should be the one in the grave." My mother let out a sharp, bitter laugh. She walked over to me, stopping just inches away. I could smell her expensive perfume, the scent masking the rot underneath. "You think you are so righteous," she hissed. "But look at you. You have no husband, no children, no life. You are just a hollow shell. We kept you around because we needed someone to fill the seat at the table. We needed a placeholder." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut deeper than any scream. "You want the truth? Fine. We didn't just wish it was you. We mourned the wrong child. Julian had potential. You are just here. You living instead of him. That is enough punishment for us. You living his life is the tragedy." The words hit me like a physical slap. I felt the air leave my lungs. For a second, I was 10 years old again, standing in the kitchen, desperate for a crumb of affection. But then I looked at her. Really looked at her, and I saw the terror behind her eyes. She wasn't attacking me because she was strong. She was attacking me because she knew I held the knife. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I simply looked at my watch. It was late. I had work to do. "Goodbye, Mother," I said. I turned and walked out the front door. Behind me, my father was shouting my name, threats mixing with pleas. My mother was wailing, but I kept walking. I walked down the long driveway, past the manicured hedges and the iron gates. I got into my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. The silence inside the car was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was the silence of a decision finally made. I drove away into the night, leaving the house on the hill to rot in its own secrets. The cursor blinked, It was a rhythmic, hypnotic pulse that seemed to synchronize with the heavy thud of my heartbeat against my ribs. We were back where we started, in the gray light of 7:59 in the morning. The coffee in the ceramic mug was still cold. The apartment was still silent, bathed in the dust motes of a Tuesday morning, but everything had changed. The laptop screen was no longer just a workspace. It was a guillotine blade, suspended and waiting for gravity to do its work. My phone buzzed against the hard oak of the desk. It vibrated with the manic intensity of a trapped insect. I glanced down at the screen. It was my mother, then my father, then my mother again. The notifications stacked up like bricks in a wall, blocking out the background wallpaper. I saw the preview of the latest text message flash across the glass. Mara, please. Think about the family. Think about your future. We can make you a partner at the firm. Just answer the phone. I laughed. A dry, sharp sound that startled me in the quiet room. Partner, I whispered to the empty air. I am not. I am not looking for a promotion. I am looking for a penance. The phone buzzed again, sliding an inch across the polished wood. Another message from my father. If you do this, you are dead to us. Do you hear me? You will be nothing. You will be alone. I looked away from the phone and back to the email. The subject line stared back at me. Federal witness, submission Vance, and partners fraud and wrongful death evidence. The cursor hovered over the blue send button. It looked innocuous, just a collection of pixels. But underneath it lay the audio files, the bank logs, the forged signatures, and the timeline of a conspiracy that had rotted our family tree from the roots up. For a brief second, doubt tried to creep in. It was the old conditioning, the muscle memory of 32 years of submission. It whispered that I was betraying my blood. It whispered that I was ungrateful. I closed my eyes and tried to summon the image of my parents, but they wouldn't form. Instead, I saw Julian. I saw him not as the saint they painted in their revisionist history, but as the voice on the tape. I heard his jagged breathing. I heard the terror of a boy who realized his protectors were his executioners. He had been alone in that car on that icy road. He had reached out for help, and they had handed him a death sentence disguised as a business transaction. They had chosen the firm over his life. If I did not send this email, I was in that car with him. If I closed the laptop now, I was driving the car. Silence was no longer just survival. Silence was complicity. I am sorry it took me so long. Julian, I said softly, my voice catching in my throat. I was so afraid of being alone. But I would rather be alone than be like them. I watched the digital clock in the corner of the screen. 7:59 and 45 seconds. The phone stopped buzzing for a moment, as if taking a breath before the next scream. In that pause, the silence of the apartment felt heavy. It was the silence of anticipation. The air pressure seemed to drop, pressing against my eardrums. 7:59 and 55 seconds. I did not tremble. My hand was steady. I thought about the signature on the release form. I thought about the erased witness. I thought about the lie that had defined my entire adult life. The numbers flipped. 8 o'clock. I pressed the mouse button. It was a small sound, a soft, plastic click. It was underwhelming. There was no explosion. There were no sirens wailing immediately outside my window. The screen refreshed. The draft window vanished. A small banner appeared at the top of the inbox, message sent. I sat back in my chair and exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding for 12 years. The data was gone. It was traveling through fiber optic cables, bouncing off servers, making its way to a secure inbox in Washington, D.C. It was out of my hands. I could not take it back. I could not undo it. The phone started buzzing again, a long, continuous vibration indicating an incoming call. My father was calling. He probably sensed it, in that primal way animals sense an earthquake before the ground shakes. I reached out and turned the phone over, screen down. Then I picked up my cold coffee and took a sip. It was bitter and stale, but it tasted real. the silence returned, filling the room. But it was different now. It wasn't the silence of secrets. It was the silence of a vacuum after a storm has sucked everything away. I sat there, watching the dust motes dance in a beam of sunlight, waiting for the world to end. The machinery of the federal government does not move with the speed of a cinematic climax. It moves with the grinding, unstoppable force of a glacier. 48 hours after I pressed send, the silence was broken, not by a scream, but by the polite knock of two agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation at the front door of Vance and Partners. They did not come with sirens. They came with a warrant authorized by a federal judge, citing probable cause for wire fraud and obstruction of justice. I sat in a sterile conference room in the downtown field office 3 days later. The table was metal, bolted to the floor. Across from me sat Special Agent Miller, a man who looked as gray and exhausted as the building itself. He had a file open in front of him. It was thick. "Ms. Vance," Miller said, adjusting his glasses. We have corroborated the metadata you provided. The digital footprints on the bank servers were clumsy. Your father was modifying loan documents from an IP address registered to his home office. He didn't even use a proxy. He thought he was untouchable, I said. My voice was flat. I was no longer the emotional daughter. I was the witness. We also reopened the traffic investigation, Miller continued. The original responding officer is retired, but we found the witness. The man in the blue sedan, Mr. Henderson. I nodded. The one they erased. He was quite eager to talk once we mentioned the possibility of an obstruction charge for him, too. Miller said, "He told us that a lawyer representing your father approached him 2 days after the accident, offered him $10,000 to forget what he saw. Mr. Henderson saw your brother's car swerve, not because of ice, but because he was on the phone, screaming. He was erratic." The witness said it looked like the driver was having a breakdown. The confirmation settled in the room like dust. It was no longer a theory. It was a statement of fact entered into a federal log. Julian died because he was distracted by terror, a terror manufactured by the people who were supposed to protect him. The legal dismantling of my family was swift and brutal. The investigation revealed that the $500,000 bridge loan was just the tip of the iceberg. My parents had been leveraging non-existent assets for years, using Julian's trust fund as collateral without his consent until the day they forced him to sign it over. When he died, they used the life insurance payout to plug the hole in the ledger. They had literally monetized his death to save their reputation. The news broke on a Tuesday. The headline in the local paper was stark: "Vance and Partners raided in federal fraud probe." There were no pictures of my parents crying. There were only mugshots. My father looked confused, his tie askew. My mother looked angry, her lips pressed into a thin line of defiance. They were released on bail, but their passports were seized and their assets were frozen. The grand jury indictment came down within the week. My phone did not ring anymore. They were legally prohibited from contacting me. I was officially listed in the court documents as cooperating witness 1. I met with the prosecutors to finalize my statement. The assistant United States attorney, a sharp woman named Sarah Jenkins, looked at me with a mixture of pity and respect. "You understand that by testifying, you are essentially ending your relationship with them permanently," Jenkins said. "Defense counsel will try to paint you as a disgruntled child. They will say you were jealous of your brother." "I know what they will say," I replied. "They have been saying it my whole life, but the timestamps don't lie. The audio recording doesn't lie." "No," she agreed. "It does not. We have the audio of the coercion. It is admissible. We are charging them with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and witness tampering. The wrongful death suit will be civil. But, well, the criminal charges carry a mandatory minimum of 20 years. 20 years. My parents were in their late 60s. It was a life sentence. I walked out of the federal building into the bright, harsh sunlight of the afternoon. The city moved around me, indifferent to the tragedy of the Vance family. The lies that had held the roof up for 12 years were gone. The foundation was cracked. The truth was now a matter of public record, stored in a government server, backed up and unchangeable. I had stripped them of their greatest weapon, their ability to control the narrative. For the first time, the story of Julian Vance was not about a tragic accident. It was about a crime. The final report from the Department of Justice was 60 pages long, but it all boiled down to one paragraph on page 42. It stated clearly that the actions of Gerald and Eleanor Vance constituted a pattern of coercion that directly contributed to the mental state and subsequent death of Julian Vance. It was no longer an accident. In the eyes of the law, it was a casualty of greed. The coroner amended the death certificate. The word accidental was not removed, but an addendum was added referencing the federal investigation. It was the closest thing to Justice Julian would ever get. My parents sat in the courtroom as the sentence was read. They looked small, without their expensive suits and the armor of their reputation. They were just two elderly people who had gambled their children's lives and lost. When the judge announced a sentence of 15 years in a federal penitentiary, my mother did not scream. She slumped forward, putting her head in her hands. My father just stared at the wall, his face blank, stripped of the arrogance that had defined him for decades. I did not feel a surge of triumph. There was no cinematic swell of music in my head. I just felt a sudden, overwhelming lightness. It was the physical sensation of a heavy coat being taken off my shoulders after wearing it for 12 years. I realized I had been carrying their guilt, their shame, and their expectations since the day Julian died. Now, I was putting it down. After the sentencing, their defense attorney approached me in the hallway. He looked tired. "Ms. Vance," he said, holding out a sealed envelope. "Your parents, they wanted you to have this. They said it explains everything." I looked at the white envelope. It probably contained more justifications, more manipulation, perhaps a final guilt trip about how I had destroyed the family legacy. "No," I said. "You don't even want to read it, I know what it says," I replied, my voice steady and cool. "It says they did it for me. It says they did it for the family. It says they forgive me for betraying them. But I don't need their forgiveness, and I certainly don't need their explanations. Burn it." I turned and walked away. I did not look back at the courtroom doors. I did not look back at the parents who had told me I should have been the one in the casket. I left them to the mercy of the system they thought they were above. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to think of Julian not as the saint on the mantle, but as my brother. I remembered him teaching me how to ride a bike. I remembered him sneaking me candy when Mom put me on a diet. He wasn't a tragic hero. He was just a boy who got scared, and that was okay. I drove back to my apartment. It was quiet, but it was not the stifling silence of the past. It was a peaceful silence. I made a fresh cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the city below. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the skyline. I was 32 years old. I had no family. I had a difficult road ahead, dealing with the fallout of the trial. But for the first time, the space I occupied in the world felt like my own. I wasn't filling a void left by someone else. I wasn't the spare tire. I was Mara Vance, and I was alive. I took a sip of the hot coffee. It tasted good. "Goodbye." "Julian," I whispered to the empty room. "Rest now. I took care of it." The sun dipped below the horizon, and the streetlights flickered on, one by one, illuminating the path forward. I was not afraid of the dark anymore. I had turned on the lights. Thank you so much for listening to this story. That was a heavy one. But sometimes the truth has to come out. No matter the cost, I would love to know where you guys are tuning in from today. So drop a comment down below with your city or country, and let me know what you would have done if you were in Mara's shoes. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Victoria Revenge Stories channel, smash that like button, and hit the hype button to help this video get discovered by more people. I'll see you in the next one.